Welcome back, educator. This is Cool Cat Teacher Talk. Critical AI, protecting brains and boosting productivity.
Ever wondered how remarkable teaching happens? Find out right now at Cool Cat Teacher Talk with award-winning teacher Vickie Davis. Get insights from top educators, tech tips, and inspiration to elevate your teaching.
AI is reshaping our schools, but are we using it wisely? Today on Cool Cat Teacher Talk, first, we'll look at the classroom where Dr. Nancy Frey, co-author with Douglas Fisher and Sal Khan of teaching students to use AI ethically and responsibly. She'll share how to protect critical thinking and help students use AI with integrity, how to clearly share how much AI should be used in an assignment. Then we'll step into the principal's office for critical productivity gains with AI with Vickie Echols, author of AI for School Leaders. She'll show us how to reclaim time, lighten workloads, and keep the focus on relationships and well-being. These two perspectives will be on today's show, one for the classroom, one for leadership, both with the same goal, making sure AI serves us, not the other way around. First, let's talk to Dr. Nancy Frey.
Cool Cat Teacher Talk with award-winning teacher Vickie Davis.
Nancy Frey is a professor in educational leadership at San Diego State and a teacher leader at Heath Sciences High and Middle College. She is a member of the International Literacy Association's Literacy Research Panel. She and her co-author, Douglas Fisher, can both be reached at fisherandfrey.com. She has co-authored with Douglas Fisher and Sal Khan in the book Teaching Students to Use AI Ethically and Responsibly. Nancy, isn't that the question of the moment right now?
It sure is, Vickie. As caring educators, all of us are trying to figure out what are the best ways to be able to utilize this in ways that are practical, ethical, and will assist our students in being able to learn more. Super excited to be here to talk about this.
Some schools have taken the restrictive AI policy approach, but how can we move to frameworks that actually help our students have student agency and ethical thinking when it comes to AI? Because isn't that what we want them to graduate having?
Exactly. The idea that certainly has been forwarded before, that what our task is as educators is to prepare students for their future, not our past. It looks like AI is here to stay. Having said that, and I think you raised a really interesting topic, Vickie, because there are lots of places where right now it's just a ban. I am not opposed to a ban. Let me explain why. I think most of us would say that as educators, we missed the boat when it came to social media. When social media first got introduced to our students as educators, we sort of sat on the sidelines and we let social media do whatever social media was going to do. We didn't really have any guidelines around how that should be used, not used, used responsibly, etc. We've paid a price for the fact that we sat that one out. And now social media is something that for all of us as educators, we see both the benefits for our students, but also the toll that it takes on students as well. Let's not sit this one out. For school systems that currently have a ban because they're not ready yet to roll it out is wise. When you're not ready to roll something out, especially something as big as this, there should be a ban. That makes sense that there's a ban, but it shouldn't be that we're ostriches just putting our heads in the sand and pretend this is going to go away. If there's a ban, it should also be forward thinking in terms of what do we need as a system to be ready to implement this.
So many of us have read the research, like, your brain on ChatGPT. And of course, it is a little concerning that a research study of such a small sample size goes viral before it's even peer reviewed. We have to say that about that research, but just a concern that students who used AI to generate a paper, for example, had zero recall just minutes after they did it. That has people going, what framework can we bring this into our school with?
Yeah, very, very good question. And I think that one of the challenges that we have as educators and as education system is that we have to think through what do our tasks, our assignments, our assessments look like in an age of AI. Plagiarism gets cited a lot because we've got students certainly who know how to enter a prompt, crank out an answer, cut, paste, turn it in, and off they go. That is in no one's best interest to be
Right.
able to do that. And as you said, what is becoming clearer is that AI used in that fashion undermines the ability for memory formation, for those sorts of very important things that we're looking for as educators. What it does require is that we think differently about our assignments. The fact of the matter is, kids have been plagiarizing for like 400 years now. With the introduction of the internet, we've certainly seen a rise in plagiarism. You need to write an essay about Romeo and Juliet. You can find a bajillion of them out there, and you can cut and paste. So the question becomes, is it still useful for kids to be able to write an essay about Romeo and Juliet? Or do we need to design different tasks
Yeah.
so that we can not only create those opportunities for critical thinking, but also that we can, as teachers, as educators, be relatively assured that what we're getting is reflective of what that child actually knows and doesn't know.
Yeah, I've got a big research project my ninth graders are doing on new technology, and I required them to create a Google Notebook LM and to generate certain number of podcasts, and I required 20 sources of information, including videos. But I wanted them to demonstrate their knowledge of how to use it. But then after that, the next assignment was, you're going to sit at my desk and verbally, without notes, explain this particular technology to me. And, the pushback that, as I've talked about this on the show before, of the role of verbal assessment has just grown in our classroom. And I have designated at least 3 to 4 times per semester to have a one-on-one verbal interaction with my students. And it has required me to shift things. The pushback is that's not practical in every classroom. My classroom sizes are a little smaller than some would have, but is it practical that we do have to shift assessments? Because I don't see any other way forward myself.
I totally agree with you. One of the things I was thinking about is, as you were describing that particular assignment, my guess is that wasn't an assignment that you were doing 10 years ago.
Well, it was an assignment, but not how they researched.
There you go.
They researched totally differently.
Being responsive and being able to understand it's a different landscape where students getting information is really important. But let me talk about the verbal aspect of that, because I think that dialogue is so essential to understanding what it is that young people know. And one of the methods for doing so is exactly what you offered. Face-to-face, we're going to have dialogue. We're going to talk with one another. And you're right. It's not necessarily practical if you've got 180 students that are on your roster that you see across the day. But there are other tools that help to accomplish those same kinds of things. I'll give one example. Google Docs, which of course has been around for quite a while, has extensions that you can add where you get to, perhaps you're reading something that a student has written, and you get to be able to ask questions verbally and have it posted right on that document. And then students have to respond back to you as well. So it's not necessarily in real time, but you can foster some dialogue that way. We can also foster dialogue by requiring students to turn in to us what was the dialogue that you had with the chatbot. I'm interested in the questions that you asked. I want to be able to see that particular transcript. It isn't always just the final product. I want to see the dialogue that goes along with it. So I'm with you on this.
And coaching on prompts. I mean, you've hit on something that's so important. I really like my students to use Perplexity. I've just found that the error rate is a little bit better. A lot of times I'll have my students, they'll generate their Perplexity report and they'll go, oh, here it is. And then I go, okay, now go back and calculate the error rate. They're not as much a fan of that one. The depth of knowledge required to evaluate all those sources is just so much more, because then it's about learning and they realize they can't park their brain at the door, that they're going to be learning. And I find they're more excited and more engaged. I really don't think they want classes where they can copy and paste. I think they want to be engaged.
I don't either. And think that we're starting to see some of that turn that is happening. When the internet was first invented, we as a society had to kind of figure out, how do we interact with this tool? And if you think back now to how it was that you performed a search, for example, in 2002, you would look at it now and you go, well, that was really simplistic, right? I mean, I've developed the skills to be able to do that. And there was a large scale study that was released by OpenAI, and they examined 500 million prompts, dialogues that were happening on their LLM. And what they noted is that for the first time, the majority of questions that were being posed, 49%, were about analysis. It wasn't just simple information generation, but rather the majority of the prompts have now moved into analysis level. In other words, we are, as a society, starting to engage with these tools in more sophisticated kinds of ways. We're recalling at higher levels how very important it is to keep the human in the loop.
I think the thing that concerned me about that study was that many were using it to analyze their own decisions. I've even seen some talks on the internet about people basically saying, okay, Chat GPT is my decision partner. And I think that's where I balk a little bit, just because there is a randomness, a probability behind the words that are generated, and it doesn't have a moral framework. And so I caution my students, just because of the young man that took his own life, started off using ChatGPT for homework, and it didn't correct his suicidal ideations. It really became a suicide coach for him. And that's the part, Nancy, that concerns me, is the safety guardrails don't seem to be there yet with some of the major LLMs that a lot of people are using. And the analysis is great, but my students, I just worry for them sometimes.
And there certainly are terrible things that are happening, and misuses of all of that, which to me suggests even more so that we need to get in front of what these conversations are. And I'll go back to that earlier idea of social media. We sat out on the sidelines for that, and we have seen some really awful repercussions because of that. Doesn't mean that everybody who's using social media is having those conversations. So I think that it's useful. And here's where we go back to this idea of schools having bans. If you're not ready, then don't just open up the floodgates. For example, being able to use school-based LLMs for the purposes of them being used in school, and not just saying, turn yourself loose on whatever, pick your favorite chatbot and just go at it. That's problematic, right? In the same way that we have tools for school that are designed for school and that are developmentally appropriate for the people that are using them. We have lots of tools like that. Look around our buildings, right? We should all have tools that are useful to be in that space and not just open things up. And, one of the things that I've really learned from Saul Kahn, one of the authors on the book, is his example, Conmingo. And what I love about that engine in particular is that it acts much more like a Socratic coach than it does just knowledge generation. So you can type in there, tell me everything you know about the War of 1812, and it will come back to you and it will say, well, first, tell me some things about what you already know about the War of 12. And it'll start asking questions. Do you know who was involved in that? Do you have a sense of what the conflict was about? It requires students to be able to think closely, what do I know? What don't I know? And to begin to shape that dialogue and not just, hey, do a brain dump for me.
Yes, because so many of them, when you have your reluctant learners, those that really just want to get the answer. Most of the tools, 4 or 5 pushbacks of I don't know, and you can break it and get that answer. And so I think it's so important, just as you've done, to test these tools with students, have beta testing programs. And so, what are some strategies to identify bias in algorithms and to critically evaluate AI generated information that you recommend?
Isn't this a skill that has become even more important in an age of AI, but certainly also predates the development of AI? So, for example, the idea of informational literacy, the idea of data literacy are absolutely essential. I'll use as one example, and Sam Weinberg's work with lateral reading is incredibly interesting. In other words, how do you read across documents and not just inside of a single document? Well, what we've done is we've taken that idea of lateral reading, which I think is brilliant, and now how do you interrogate that across AI generated content? What are those questions that you can pose to that AI chatbot to be able to verify? And that's another one of those important literacy skills. How do you verify whether this information is correct or not? What are the limitations of what any AI chatbot can generate? For example, do students know that AI is not a good source whenever you're talking about like current events because the LLMs, they're not as current, they're not as up to date. So, really being able to think about what it is that you are asking for, when it is appropriate to turn to AI, how will you interrogate, analyze what the content is so that you can make decisions about what is the final product. Those are all essential skills that are teaching kids about how to use it ethically.
I love that. And one thing I've kind of steered towards is helping my students create a research library. So back in the day when I was at Georgia Tech, I was a research assistant for a professor for about a year and a half. I used to go to the library and go through, it was electronic card catalog, but it was still a card catalog. But when I look at what these tools can do and how much more quickly I could have done the research back then with these tools, just helping my students almost build their own mini research library, sort of to use as a reference doc. I've built a project inside my LLM with all of these reference documents to help pull it back to a more accurate rate. 85% accuracy is not acceptable in academia or anywhere. I just see my own use of AI has shifted dramatically. You made me think when I was thinking about search and how we searched differently, but I'm literally AIing differently and teaching AI differently. So, how do we keep up with this and have these conversations so we can pivot?
One of the useful things for us to engage in as education systems is to start thinking about your skill progressions across those grade bands. What does AI usage look like when it comes to K2? And AI usage in K2 is not kids getting on a chat bot and working away at that, but it's in fact when the teacher builds the habits and the dispositions about asking simple questions like, is this true? And we call them truth detectives. How do we interrogate materials of any kind? How do we notice when something is true versus when something is pretend? Those are appropriate kinds of questions for the very youngest children to be able to engage in. And it's building those habits and those dispositions around verification before they've ever touched a keyboard. And then we go into grades 3 to 5, and now we're growing those information investigators. And so in many cases, it's the teacher that is the one who is conducting the search with students and letting them see what it is that the chatbot is generating. How do we push back on it? How do we notice whenever something just doesn't sound right? Where did this information come from? So in the elementary grades, it's way less about kids touching a keyboard and engaging with a chatbot, and a whole lot more about building the habits and building the dispositions around how it is that you verify information. How do we as adults show young people how it is that we verify information? And that's just one example. But I think that that idea of skills progressions and what this looks like in those different grade bands can be a starting point for teachers and for systems to be able to look closely at what's appropriate AI use and what is not.
Nancy, so many things out there are so tool focused, and it's like we're going to really look at the literacies and the skill progression.
I'm at a high school as well as you are. We've had now for the last 2 years in every one of our course syllabi, we have a table in there that is an indicator of what is the level of AI use that is appropriate for this particular task. What teachers have to do is to be able to say, this particular task that we're doing, this is an AI 0. In other words, there is no use of AI that is not appropriate for this particular task. All the way up to a level 4, where you are required for this task to be able to engage with AI as a part of the work that you're doing. And being very explicit with adolescents in being able to say there are different tasks that have different levels of appropriateness in terms of AI. And the credit belongs to North Carolina Public Instruction. They're the ones who developed this incredibly useful template that we've adopted and that we use throughout the school. Is this an AI level 1 assignment? Here's what that means. Is this an AI level 3 assignment? Here's what that means.
Love that. You've just given me such an insight. I like to give assignments to my AP Computer Science Principles class that only AI can do. So it was an hour and 50-minute YouTube interview. Take the transcript out of it with timestamps and compare it to a particular document that had sort of a ethical framework for looking at AI. I had to listen to the first 20 minutes and do it as a human, right? And then the rest of it, I wanted them to do something that would have taken me as a research assistant 3 to 4 days.
Yeah.
And you could do it in minutes and look at the source documents and draw a lot faster conclusion. I literally had a student who would not use AI, and he couldn't do it because the scale of that research was so much that it was not humanly possible to do it without dedicating a week. And now you've given me a framework to say, I'm requiring you to use AI that are AI level 4. I think that's a valid point I've never thought about before, Nancy.
Absolutely. And I think that that is a key to being able to teach young people about how you use AI responsibly, how you use it ethically. Is this an AI level 4 assignment, which means full AI use with human oversight, always keeping the human in the loop, all the way down to no AI whatsoever. We can scale tasks that fall all along those lines as well. That we use a very similar kind of approach at the university, that AI can be an aggregator of information. It can go out there just like you offered and be able to gather up some information about a particular topic. So this idea that you can give the chatbot a role as a coach, as a tutor. I need to study for my math test and that it's going to be on quadratic equations. Ask me questions about quadratic equations, and here's what the kinds of things I need to make sure that I'm really good at. Now it's a tutor.
The problem is, of course, AI quote detectors don't work.
They're awful.
Academic integrity is who we are. We don't do this job just to shadow box. We do this job because we're professionals and we love the job and we love kids and we want what's best for them. How do we help teachers in this time period where I'm having to hold them accountable, but if they're a good liar or if they're a really good student, they always spell everything right anyway, they're not going to get caught. Nobody likes to feel like they've been made a fool out of. Too many teachers who feel that way of, if I can't catch it, they're all going to write right in front of me. I'm going to do the blue book. they're going to write on paper. And there may be times for that. But how do we grapple with this as teachers where we're not deceived?
I agree with you. We do a lot of in-class writing, timed writing. You have 20 minutes. This is what the prompt is, and you're going to do it right in front of us. That is definitely one of the approaches to be able to use, for sure. But the other is, how do we think closely about how it is that we redesign some of the tasks that we're asking students to do so that they're a bit more AI resistant? And use the example of a student who says, yeah, I got everything off of Quillbot, which is definitely not a cool thing to do in any way. But it also causes some wondering, what was it about the assignment in the way that it was written that made it easy for that student to use Quillbot? I'll use as another example, and this is Carol Jago's work that she's been doing for decades now. At the end of an essay, asking some questions about, what did you find the most difficult thing to do? If you had more time, what would you do with this next? Asking some of those reflective questions that are not questions that a chatbot is easily going to be able to fulfill helps to be able to make sure that the young humans in front of us are present in those assignments.
Because you really couldn't answer that if you just generate it. You'd have to go back and reread what you turned in because you just don't know.
You sure would. And one of my favorite reflective questions that Carol Jago offers is, if you had more time, what would you do?
So do you teach writing differently now as a result of
Yes.
AI?
Yeah, absolutely. AI is great for going out there and being able to aggregate some of that information and bring it to my doorstep so that I can take a look at it. Saves a tremendous amount of time. But once I have all of that information, now I have to make sense of it. Now I have to be able to figure out, how am I going to use all of this? Another way that we talk about AI within the task of writing specifically is when AI is your brainstorming partner. I'll use a university example with this. I worked with a student who was interested in learning more about high expectations teaching and the research for that. And she didn't know a whole lot about it at the time. I had her turn in what her dialogue was that she did with the chatbot. What were the questions that you asked the chatbot about high expectations teaching? What did that dialogue look like so that you can brainstorm along with the chatbot as well? And a third way is in being a feedback provider. So I've generated some writing. I've got a draft that's working. Now have the chatbot analyze that writing compared to the rubric for that writing so that it can let me know, here are some gaps. I did this the other day with a student's paper. It was a very long paper. It had developed sort of in fits and starts, and I had read several versions of it. And I felt like, what I need to be able to understand what's in this student's paper. And so the first thing I did is I blinded the assignment, making sure that, no student name, no identifying data. And I put the student's writing into the chatbot along with my rubric and asked it, can you tell me where it is that you are seeing some gaps in what should be in this paper? It allowed me then to be able to read through this paper in a much more precise kind of way, to be able to understand, here's what it is that I might want to look for. Did I agree with everything that the chatbot said? No, I did not. I'm the expert. The chatbot is my intern, but it saved me some time and I got to be able to provide some much more specific feedback. And for me, I had a lot more confidence in the feedback that I was giving to that student because of it.
Well, I teach my students a prompt to get feedback because you're going to turn in the link of the chat where I got the formative feedback so that I could supervise, dig into the process of how they're using AI. So what are some practical steps that you can give teachers who still feel like they're really new to this just to get started with the AI journey in their class?
And I think the AI journey in class always starts with the AI journey in you. So in other words, what are things that you are experimenting with it, you're learning about. And I will give you a so not school example. Megan Hargrave is another one of the authors, along with Jim Marshall, on the book around AI. When ChatGPT first came out with their app version, she opened up her refrigerator. She filmed what was in there, opened up the drawers, and asked ChatGPT, give me some ideas for things that I can make for dinner tonight based on what I already have. And what the chatbot was able to do was to come up with a whole bunch of ideas. Some of the ideas were terrible. And Megan's like, no, I'm not making that. Nobody in my house is going to eat that, right? But it also came up with some good ideas that she hadn't thought about before. Being able to kind of experiment on your own, try some things out, can be really useful. I had to plan a birthday party and for an adult. I had these adults that were coming in from some different places around the country. I'm like, okay, what's a birthday party look like when it's all adults? I don't want foolishness because there were going to be a whole bunch of people there who didn't know each other, but they all knew the birthday person, right? And it gave me a whole bunch of ideas of things that I could do during the party to be able to kind of help bring people together and have common conversation and things like that. There were at least 10 ideas that were on there that were stupid and that I wasn't going to do at all, right? And you know what? There were about 5 ideas on there that I did do. Being able to play with AI in your own personal life, I think, is that first step before you're ever debuting it in the classroom. That second step is, how can AI help you, give you some assistance in your professional tasks? Again, not in front of kids. How can AI help in our PLCs? Teachers have been using AI to be able to help them generate learning intentions and success criteria, right? Don't have to spend all my time wordsmithing them. Instead, what the team can do is react to them. Really use their wisdom to be able to do so. And then when you're feeling like, okay, I know some more things about what the limitations are, how this works, how this doesn't work, then moving into that third step, how am I going to use AI with my students?
Fantastic. The book is Teaching Students to Use AI Ethically and Responsibly. We've been talking to Nancy Frey, professor of educational leadership at San Diego State. The book is co-authored with Douglas Fisher and Sal Khan. I like that you say, okay, these are the conditions where you might want to ban it. And that's okay. But I think even if you have a ban, hopefully you have a plan.
I love that. You can have a ban, but have a plan. I'm going to use that in my own life.
Thank you for coming on the show, Nancy.
Thank you so much.
Cool Cat Teacher Talk with award-winning teacher Vickie Davis.
Now, after hearing from Dr. Nancy Frey about the importance of teaching our students to think critically in the age of AI, let's zoom out to help school leaders think critically about the wise, safe uses of AI. If teachers and students are carrying the weight of using AI responsibly, what about principals and school leaders? How can AI help the professionals who work in schools cut through the noise, reduce burnout, and free up time to focus on people instead of paperwork? Today, we're talking with Vickie Echols. She's been a principal, a curriculum coordinator, university educator, and a consultant. Her newest book is from ISTE, AI for School Leaders, 62 Ways to Lighten Your Workload and Focus on What Matters. So, Vickie, describe a moment from your leadership journey that changed your view on what matters most for students and staff.
Part of the reason I wrote this book, I was walking down the hall with the teacher. She and I were moving from one place to the other, and my pace was so fast that she stopped and she goes, Miss Echols, do you always walk this fast? I realized at that moment that I was that kind of person. I was always kind of moving from one to the next. It really was an overwhelming stress level for me in many of the roles I had. And her question brought to life to me the idea that I need to pay attention to what's going on, because I'd had several health issues that had been alerting me to that. It was really an eye-opener to me to start thinking about it, and also witnessing the same crisis happening nationally, especially during COVID. It became very apparent. When I heard about the tools that generative AI was offering, I realized that this was kind of a pivot that I could offer for people who have also felt that way. Thinking through how rewarding this job is, you want to be able to enjoy it and have a balance, home, school, work, and life. It's a pivotal moment for me because that really has become the focus now in this new chapter I'm in, really zoning in on well-being and how we can transform ourselves to really being more sustainably healthy in our jobs. Does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah, it focuses on that emotional intelligence. One of my favorite quotes from a former pastor of mine was that walk slowly through the crowd because everybody has a hurt. And I'm opening up my classes this year with emotional intelligence and helping build their capacity to build relationships. There's so much out there. Carrie Patterson in his book, Influence, said that if you want to build influence, it's spelled TIME. Generously give your time and slow down. And we want to slow down, but then we've got more and more emails and so many things. Can you describe? It sounds like what matters most is relationships, but do you have any other things that matter most that have shaped the types of things you've picked in this book?
Well, it is true. We've got to pump the brakes on work that's tedious and really focus in on the time we spend with people. That relationship happens and trust happens over layers of time. I remember walking into a new campus or a new classroom and knowing that it's going to take time to build that trust. And I think that to get to those conversations is where I think we've got to work toward. And that's why I think using tools to help you minimize that tedious, boring work to get to those moments of interaction and really be able to enjoy as well as get curious and learn and reclaim a lot of that invaluable time that we need for our own well-being so we can focus on what matters.
So as we get ready, Vickie, to go into, and I know those who are listening are on, we got two Vickies, you can tell by accents, but EdSurge reported that by mid-2025, over 67% of K-12 schools now use AI-powered tools and say that efficiency is the primary benefit. So, some people say, hey, some uses are efficient, some are not. But what kind of AI uses are you seeing where true efficiency comes out of it?
Well, efficiency, productivity, those are all the words, that we seem to really zone in on when we're trying to get back some of that time. And I know there are a lot of ways to do that. What I've zoned in on is making sure that we learn the tools well enough so that it's, and it's going to be a learning curve to get there. But to really answer your question, I think to zone in on the idea that we have to really study this new tool because it is with us. It is not going away. Students are using it. And although it's hard to add one more thing, I had another biscuit to the plate. We've got to be able to spend time learning it because it's here to stay. And it really will give us back more time in the long run. I'm finding that in my own life as well. In a lot of the different ways that we use it.
So we want to dig into some tools. Like, for example, here's one from today. I teach an AP Computer Science Principles course. And I always, I would love to be able to reuse the same lesson plans every year. And I do copy them over. We use chalk, but I always tweak them just a little bit. But what I've started doing is I take my slides, I tweak my slides, I add a few things, I add the standards, right? And then I have created a project in ChatGPT with our standard lesson planning outline, and I'll feed in the slides and I'll say my changes, and then I'll feed in that lesson plan I had from last year, and I'll say, adjust this lesson plan format to add blank, blank, and blank. I get the output, I tweak it, and I put it back in. So I'm still totally in the driver's seat, right? I'm not handing over any cognitive load, really. What I'm handing over is basically almost like if I had a secretary where I could say, change this, this, and this, and then it gives it back to me. So I want you to give me some examples of, okay, principals are saying this use of AI makes them more efficient.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, well, there are so many tools, ways to use this tool. And what I did in the book was I picked up the research that the Wallace Foundation did on what were the primary responsibilities of a principal or as a school leader. And then it applies to, I think, a classroom leader as lead teacher or someone who's guiding any kind of group. And that is looking at these important aspects like collaborative decision-making, looking at building that trust and through communication, supportive relationships, as we mentioned earlier, professional learning, decision-making based on data, crunching that data for school improvement, and family and community engagement. That's always one that
Yeah.
we try to get better at. And I think that AI has that ability to really speed up the process of taking our ideas, refining them, and then curating them into products that we can use so much faster. I'll give you an example. Sitting in a meeting with a group of people is important because we can all share ideas and we're much more productive if we're sharing, but it takes so much time to do that. And I remember sitting all afternoon fleshing out, wordsmithing a new vision statement or a new mission statement. You know what I'm talking about? Just wordsmithing and going
Yep.
back and forth over those ideas can get they're important, but they're time consuming and a little frustrating because you're trying to collaborate and then get consensus. And what I've found is that as I've been talking with school leaders, is that process can really be minimized by giving the ideas that are curated from the group into the chat generated machine and giving them asking for suggestions on feedback of overlap of statements that might capture the general ideas, giving actual statements back so that everyone can think through which of these statements that has been generated matches what their thinking was. It just speeds the process up. Team proposals, grants, questions for discussions, any kind of project management is so much easier as a team when you look at collaborative decision making with AI. That's one. I think that
Collaborative decision making. That's so important because I actually turned up some research. ASCD says that effective teacher collaboration improves student achievement by up to 18%. Edutopia says that schools that prioritize teamwork report gains in student engagement and attendance and even more. You're telling us that. Now, do you like AI note takers or not? Now, I want to caution AI note takers can only be used when you're not dealing with confidential student information, obviously.
that's a
But
really good point.
for visioning and that sort of thing, can't you use an AI note taker and then feed that into your chat tool to help make faster progress?
Absolutely. I tell you one tool that I have just been so excited about, and it's come out since the book was written, and that's Notebook LM, so that you can
Yeah.
drop in your current vision statement, your policies, all of the things that have already been curated by your team, and then start to curate questions based on just that information. You can pull in, of course, other research, but it's really a nice bubble to be able to use the AI tools. I've had good luck with ChatGPT, with Gemini, with Claude. As long as, like you said, we're really keeping those guidelines strict about FERPA safety and security of our student information and adults as well.
Well, you just hit on one, Vicki, the Notebook LM. So when you feed in your policy manuals, your student manuals, your whatever, I had a question today about dress code for a particular grade and was like, okay, is this particular thing allowed for a secondary student? And Notebook LM fed back to me, no, this is what's allowed and gave me a page number.
Exactly.
Just like that. So I think every school should create a Notebook LM for all their policy manuals, at least for their admin team, for revisions and for everything else. It's just such a great, useful tool. And I know parents that have loaded it in them for themselves,
It's true. That's exactly right. I had that same idea popped up when someone was saying they check on their sick leave, put the sick leave policies in and then decide whether or not your particular situation is going to play and stick with that.
Yeah.
And superintendent told me she uses it for her board and gives the podcast curated from LM to give them a preview or a post conversation about what was discussed in case they missed the meeting. I thought those were brilliant ways to use it as well.
Wow. And of course, we want to say when you use that podcast generation, which is a great tool, now they have video overviews. Ultimately, we're using it to help us. We're not offloading our thinking. I think that's a really big piece to kind of delineate there. Okay, one of my IT director jobs, I approve the apps in Google Admin Console. And so I take a screenshot of all the requests that have come through. I actually use Perplexity for that. And I put the screenshot in there and I ask it to talk about educational value, use of private information, safety for kids. Are there any news articles about this particular tool that show that it's not useful or safe for kids? And it really speeds up my time for approval so that when I go back to the teacher, I can say, hey, did you know this and this? Or this lets strangers chat privately to kids rather than just saying no or just saying yes. I think as long as you're checking your sources, all of
Absolutely.
those can be valuable, you know?
Underline
Those
that.
are
Yeah.
great uses.
I
Yeah.
think that's true.
So let me ask you a question. The question I have to ask everybody in AI is this recent MIT research, and yes, it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. And yes, it only had like 54 subjects, but it was titled Your Brain on ChatGPT. And it showed that students who write using only AI tools like ChatGPT often can't remember what they wrote. They basically have zero recall immediately after turning in that assignment, and they have much weaker brain engagement. In fact, I was listening to another podcast that was interviewing some researchers about it. And they're like, you know what? When people do this, they're really offloading their cognitive load. And they're actually concerned about the early onset of dementia and Alzheimer's if we offload our cognitive load that much, right? So that's obviously something administrators are dealing with right now. What are they telling you about how they're grappling with? Because we don't want to play gotcha, and we know that AI detectors don't work. How are they grappling with assessment and curriculum advisement and all of that? Because this is a real issue.
It is true. Cognitive power, is something we don't want to lose. But in my opinion, and what I've seen and read is it all depends on how you structure the process. And if we're really teaching people to think, which is what writing's about, and there's been a lot of discussion about, writing in anything can be compromised with this machine, but I've seen it enhanced in my personal writing because I'm not telling it to think for me. I'm asking it to give me feedback or to give me suggestions that I can consider and critically analyze. I'm using those higher level skills. And I think that a lot of what we have to do is analyze what we're choosing to use it for, because that thinking process can, I think, elevate if we're really mindful about it. And I'll tell you, my spelling has gotten so much better since I have the spell check, right? My fourth grade teacher told me I may not have a life as a writer because of my spelling inaccuracies, but I do have to know whether I have to analyze it, of course, but I feel like that creative process with the tools that I've learned to use also has been enhanced. I think it's all in how we set forth our staying smart. And that's one thing I wrote about in the book was sort of a checklist or a list of ways that we can stay smart to really look at our policies. How are we setting up those guardrails for safety?
Yeah.
Are we looking at privacy? We mentioned that. Bias and ethics in this machine is a real important a blind spot for people if they're not aware of it. We've got to be aware that machines have been trained and we're going to be getting back from them what has been trained into them. So that input-output bias ethics is real important. Accuracy, though, like you said, is huge, that whole hallucination factor. And so we've got to really look at validating the information. And that takes a lot of cognitive ability as well, cross-checking, triangulating. And I think most of all is not to be over-reliant. We've got to really challenge ourselves to think, what if I didn't have AI in this situation? How would I think about it? Or start there with how would I think about it? And then interact with this buddy. It's like you said, there is a thought partner, and not to be confused with another human, but it is very human-like. And it does have, it's improving so much, so fast that we've got to become aware.
Well, my students do listen to my podcast. I have to say this. So I don't let them use the term thought partner because it's not a partner to me. It's a tool, because I'm so concerned about all of these social AI tools. They don't call it he or she. So Richard Collada, the head of ISTE ASCD, was on the show recently, and he said, Vickie, the dishonesty rate, the cheating rate is really unchanged before AI and after AI. We're just bringing it to the front. Some of the stickiest issues I've ever dealt with were when I knew parents were writing papers. And so if I asked one kid to explain it, I didn't ask others. So now we talk about everything. I tell my students everything's on the table. And everybody is going to have to discuss and explain at least 2 things a semester, at least, because we're going to talk about it. We're going to make sure you understand it by just saying, hey, we just want to make sure you understand what you wrote about. Back in the day, they had girlfriends and boyfriends write papers, mamas, aunts, uncles. This is not anything new. I think just talking about it is a good thing. So let's shift for a second. Are there any uses of AI that you think do not improve a school or make it more efficient that you want to warn people about?
I would say it's definitely not something to dump all your student ID information. That sort of privacy aspect, I think, is of the biggie. And as far as analyzing data, I think it can be very useful. But honestly, Vickie, I think if you're smart about it, it's like you said, it's a tool. And if we use it like any tool, if you're going into woodwork, you're going to have some safety factors to wear goggles. You're going to have a manual to really remind you of how to be smart with this tool. And that's why I think there's less to worry about and more to train and talk about that we really have to think of as a new frontier. It's really exciting to me that this is happening. It is something collaboratively we can just find, I think, a whole lot of new ways to be smart and to be creative and communicate better. I think that one of the things that I don't believe a lot of people have thought about is that, communication is really the crux of what glues us together. If we're really good communicators. And that's where I think this tool can help people who are not naturally good at it. I had a teacher tell me once that she started realizing that her tone in the emails were really off-putting when people were responding the way they were. And she learned to use the tone factor for GPT, just having a conversational, empathetic, using tone words helped her realize how to shift her language and to help her get across her message. Her intention was there, but her language, her ability, her skill set was not. So I think that's an interesting area that may not be one that people think about using to build trust in relationships, but it can if you use it correctly.
Absolutely. And see, asking for feedback is such a great use. I will have one caution that's starting to happen. And we've said that AI detectors basically don't work, but what the kids do is they use ChatGPT and then they may have a humanizer and they have all this method. However, people who don't, my students joke the only people who get caught using AI are the people who don't understand AI. They're decent chat detectors for ChatGPT itself, right? And so what I've seen some people do is use ChatGPT to craft these beautiful emails that they actually really worked hard to create. But when they copy and paste it and put it in there, and it's so different from anything they've ever done before, parents and students are running it through GPT-0 to see if ChatGPT wrote it and basically finding out it did. And then that kind of undermines the person. So the best way to do it, I would just say, is to ask for the feedback and then make the changes yourself to what you wrote, because it cuts both ways. I mean, it just does.
I see your point. I would add to that, though, that, I think our mindset about using this tool might shift as we use it more often.
It may.
When calculators first came out, there were a lot of conversations around how we're going to lose our ability to calculate or to estimate. And certainly that has shifted, I'd say, somewhat, because we now have such high power calculators, right?
Yeah.
And so, we can do more with it. I don't think that necessarily, like you said, the gotcha attitude works. I think it's more, what was your intention here? What are you trying to get across, and how are you thinking about it? And if I need to write an email as in your suggestion and it doesn't sound like me, I need to train my machine to sound more like me.
Yes,
which is kind of an interesting thing. You can. I just think that's so cool. And it's still me. Yeah. It's just an added value to how I wanted to say it, in my opinion.
Yes, that integrity. And then also understanding that sometimes you just need to have a face-to-face conversation. And you can even use, ChatGPT to coach you on that. So we've learned so much and so many interesting aspects. Since I'm a classroom teacher, it really helps to talk to somebody who works with administrators all the time. So So, Vickie, are there any AI tools that have come out since you published the book that you're like, okay, this has potential?
Yeah. Potential and excitement for a true geek. I mean, I have just been surprised. We've talked about Notebook LM. That was one of them. And the other is Google Vids. I was at ISTE conference and saw them demoing it. So I came home and started playing with it. And we've been on an African safari this summer. And no kidding, it was so fun to jump in and drop in different ideas. It integrates with Google really well. You can take your slide deck, drop it in, and it'll outline it just like a video deck that you want to build. Then it'll give you a chance to write your script in there and have an avatar of different tones and male or female voices. And you can have it record your own voice as well. You can put your own videos in, but it will also create 8-second videos. So I can ask it just like a DALL-E, where you add it a still photo to, describe what style you want. And it will just give you such a lifelike image of, say, two teachers talking with each other and one exchanging an envelope with the others to illustrate empathy. I mean, it's just really mind-blowing how creativity is going to be elevated with this new palette. Yeah.
So Google Vids, I have seen in Google Classroom. It sounds like I need to play with it. And it almost sounds like Canva video, which is done very similar, where you have slides, except I'm sure that Google has integrated something called Veo 3. They have the best generative AI video creator I've seen. So that sounds really cool. And so that would be some really cool uses for administrators to be able to crank out a quick video, wouldn't there?
Absolutely. With family engagement, that is the way to reach people through their phone, right? And just coming up with those videos sometimes is just really difficult, and it's to be creative and eye-catching, and because there's so much going on in families' lives. So yeah, I would totally say that's the way to go. And you're using AI video is not going to encroach on anybody's face, and privacy. So there's a lot of ways to just energize the messaging that way. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's added to my list, Vickie. Thanks for bringing that one.
Sure. Have fun.
Vickie Echols, the book is AI for School Leaders, 62 Ways to Lighten Your Workload and Focus on What Matters. Vickie, thank you for coming on the show, for sharing your perspectives and letting me ask the questions that so many of us are asking, and for giving such thoughtful answers. Thank you, Vickie.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Cool Cat Teacher Talk with award-winning teacher Vickie Davis.
Whether you're in the classroom guiding students or in the office leading a school, one truth is clear: the wise use of AI is critical to our future. You can find the show notes at coolcatteacher.com/critical AI. Today's best-selling author, Dr. Nancy Frey, reminded us to protect our students' brains and their ability to think differently. Then Vickie Echols showed us how to protect our own time and well-being as school leaders. Together, today's insights have reminded us that AI should never replace the human heart of education. When we use AI well, it can make us be more present, more thoughtful, and more connected. That's critical AI. Educator, remember that in a world of noise, when you are truthful and honest, when you're genuine in wanting to help students, you really do shine. Your work matters and you matter. And I hope that all of us educators remember that we are working with the future of our world. Teaching is a noble profession, and I'm so glad I get to be a teacher with you at this time in history. This is Vickie Davis with Cool Cat Teacher Talk. See you later, educator.
Stay in the loop. Visit coolcatteacher.com for the latest tips and trends.